Have you ever noticed how the clearer you become, the quieter your life gets? Some people don't need to raise their voice to cause a shift. Just their clarity is enough to make the room uncomfortable. Imagine what would happen if, one day, you stopped pretending to agree, stopped nodding along, and just told the truth not to others, but to yourself. That's when everything begins to change, not because you shouted louder, but because you finally stop lying to yourself. You think you're being clear. You speak in full sentences, quote authors, cite research, express your thoughts confidently. But something doesn't land. People nod, but their eyes are distant. You walk away from conversations unsure if anyone actually heard you, or if you even heard yourself. Most people confuse articulation with clarity. But clarity isn't how well you say something, it's how honest you're willing to be with what's underneath your words. And most of us, we're not speaking from truth. We're speaking from habit, from defense, from the persona we built to be accepted. Pause. Have you ever caught yourself explaining something you didn't even believe in just because it made others comfortable? That's not clarity. That's emotional camouflage. We live in a world that rewards fast thoughts, confident takes, immediate answers. But underneath that surface is a deeper, quieter realm most people never access. Not because they can't, but because it's terrifying. Because the moment you get truly clear, the mask begins to slip. And that mask isn't just for others, it's for you. It's the story you've told yourself about who you are, what you stand for, what you need to believe to survive. But clarity doesn't care about your story. Clarity waits. It waits in the pause between thoughts. It waits in the space after a question you don't want to answer. It waits in the uncomfortable silence when you ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? And most people fill that silence before the answer ever has a chance to rise. Here's the hard truth. Much of what we call thinking is just emotional patterning disguised as logic. You're not analyzing, you're justifying. You're not understanding, you're defending. And you don't even know you're doing it. You think you're being honest, but you're only being habitual. And the worst part, you've done it for so long. It feels like clarity. That's the trap. That's the illusion. Until one day, you stumble. You say something you've always said, but this time it rings hollow. You feel it in your body, a slight tightening in your chest, a moment of unease. And in that instant, the illusion cracks. You realize, I don't even know if I believe this anymore. That moment, that fracture is sacred. It's not weakness, it's awakening. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you follow that crack, you don't just lose the sentence, you lose the identity attached to it. You lose your certainty, your social role, your sense of belonging. And that's why most people stop there. They backtrack, they double down, they reinforce the illusion. But the few who dare to keep going, they begin to see not just ideas, but themselves. Not just what they say, but why they say it. And that's when real clarity begins, not as a performance, but as a presence. If that scares you, good, it should. Because this isn't about saying smart things. It's about becoming someone who can no longer lie to themselves. And that kind of person, they will lose friends. They will feel alone. But they will find something no amount of approval can give them self-trust. So let me ask you, when was the last time you questioned the very thought you were proud to think? And if you did, what would unravel next? At first, it feels like you're just thinking, forming opinions, sharing perspectives, making sense of the world like everyone else. But if you sit still long enough, if you ask yourself not, what do I think? But where is this coming from? Something else emerges. Pain, not always loud, often subtle. But there, a tremor under the surface of your confidence, a shadow behind the certainty. It starts with something small. You disagree with someone and your chest tightens. Not because the topic is urgent, but because you need to be right. You see someone happy and instead of joy, you feel annoyance. You hear a belief that contradicts yours and suddenly your identity feels under threat. Why? Because behind every strong opinion, there's often an unhealed story. Maybe your belief in discipline isn't about virtue. It's about control. Born from a childhood of chaos, maybe your pride in independence isn't strength, it's self-protection, carved out of betrayal. Maybe your confidence in your values isn't clarity, it's armor, shielding you from the pain of being misunderstood again. We rarely think our opinions are emotional, but when you pull the thread of any rigid belief far enough, you almost always find an old wound at the end. This is where the illusion of logic shatters, because while you're busy defending your stance, your nervous system is defending your survival. The rational argument, just a mask for the part of you that doesn't want to feel that old sting again. You call it conviction. But deep down, it's fear dressed as clarity. It's easy to point this out in others. To see how someone clings to a political view, a lifestyle choice, a belief system not because it's true, but because it's safe. But it's harder, much harder to look in the mirror and say, what if my strongest opinions are just echoes of my pain? Sit with that. Let it shake something loose. Let it strip away the comfort of being right. Because the moment you stop hiding behind your opinions, the wound reveals itself. It might be shame. It might be abandonment. It might be that one moment you've never told anyone about, the moment that taught you to build your worldview around defense. And here's the paradox. The moment you see that, you soften. Not because you have fewer opinions, but because you stop needing them to protect you. You begin to see others differently. 2. You hear anger, and instead of reacting, you wonder, what's hurting underneath this? You hear arrogance, and instead of judging, you sense, who taught them they had to prove their worth? Clarity turns your mind into a mirror, not a weapon. And that's when the shift happens. Not outside, but inside. You don't argue to win anymore. You speak to understand, and sometimes you don't need to speak at all. Because when your clarity is no longer reactive, it becomes receptive. It doesn't shut others down. It lets truth rise up from the silence. So here's your next question, one most people never dare to ask. Which of my beliefs are actually just ways I've been trying not to feel? If you follow that thread, what part of yourself might finally get to be seen? It never arrives with thunder. No flash of lightning, no dramatic soundtrack. Just a pause, a breath you didn't know you were holding, a silence thick with something sacred. Then it hits you not as a scream, but as a whisper. I've been lying to myself. That moment changes everything. Not because the lie was big, but because it was familiar. Because you built your days around it. Because it kept you safe. Maybe it was the belief that you're okay, even when your chest has felt hollow for months. Maybe it was the story that they loved you, even though their actions never quite aligned. Maybe it was the identity of being strong while you were secretly crumbling, quietly praying someone would notice without you having to say a word. We don't lie to ourselves because we're weak. We lie because we're afraid that if the truth came out, everything would fall apart. Our relationships, our careers, our self-image. So we keep the performance going. Smile, numb, rationalize, repeat. But the body always knows. There's a tremble in your voice when you talk about that one subject, a flicker in your eyes when someone gets too close, a tiredness that sleep never fixes. And then one day, the cost becomes too high. The mask grows too heavy, the disconnect too wide, and you finally let the truth rise, not because you're ready, but because you can't survive the weight of denial anymore. This moment isn't elegant. It's not the epiphany Hollywood promised. It's raw. It's grief-laced. It's lonely, because you realize you weren't just lying to others, you were lying to you. But here's what they don't tell you. That moment, it's the birth of your real self. The moment you stop reciting the script and start speaking your actual truth, stammering, trembling, unsure it's ugly. Yes, but it's yours. It's the first time you've heard your own voice echo from a place deeper than ego. And once you taste that honesty, you can't go back. You might try. You might tell yourself, it's just a phase. It's too risky to live like this. You might pretend for a few more weeks, but something in you has already shifted. The lie has lost its flavor. The mask no longer fits. And peace becomes impossible without truth. This is the threshold. The line between who you were told to be and who you actually are. And crossing it means loss. You might lose people. You might lose comfort. You will almost certainly lose the version of you that was never truly yours to begin with. But what you gain presence. You gain a voice that no longer trembles when silence falls. You gain a self that looks back at you in the mirror, not polished, not perfect, but real. So many people never cross that line. They'd rather stay admired than authentic. They'd rather be loved for the mask than risk being alone for the truth. But if you're here, you're different. You've already felt it, that flicker of rebellion, that sacred discomfort that says, I can't do this anymore. And maybe, just maybe, you've already whispered your first real truths. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you let go of the performance for good? And who might you finally become? Once you do, you thought the hardest part would be admitting the truth to yourself. It wasn't. The hardest part is what comes next when your truth begins to spill out into your life. Uncontainable. Not because you shouted it, but because you stopped hiding it. Suddenly, people feel it. In your pauses, in your eyes when they tell the same old joke you used to laugh at, in the way you no longer play along. And then something quiet but seismic begins to happen. They pull back, or you do, sometimes both. The connections you thought were solid start to thin. Conversations become strained. Texts go unanswered. They say, you've changed. But what they really mean is, you're no longer pretending. And that, to them, is threatening. Because many relationships are built not on truth, but on shared illusions, on unspoken contracts. I'll play this role if you keep playing yours. I'll agree to your story if you don't question mine. But when you become clear, truly clear, you start to break those contracts. You stop nodding just to keep the peace. You stop laughing at what doesn't feel right. You stop rescuing people from their discomfort by abandoning your own. And in doing so, you shift the entire dynamic. What once felt like closeness now reveals itself as dependency. What once passed as support now feels like subtle control. This is the price most people don't speak about. Clarity isn't lonely because you want it to be. Clarity is lonely because it strips away everything that was based on anything less than truth, and that includes people, not out of punishment, not even out of judgment, but simply because there is no longer resonance. You're not vibrating at the same frequency anymore. You're not feeding each other's illusions. You're not available for emotional performance. So yes, you will lose them. The friend who needed you to always be the listener but never listened. The partner who loved your silence, not knowing it came from suppression. The family member who praised your obedience, not your authenticity. They may leave or stay, but resent your growth, or worse, try to drag you back to the version of you they were more comfortable with. This is the crossroads, where many turn back, because the grief of disconnection feels unbearable, because the silence that follows truth can feel like failure. But I want you to hear this. That silence is space, that grief is cleansing, and that loss is alignment. It's not that you're becoming unlovable, it's that you're becoming unfakeable. And not everyone is ready for that. Let them go. Let them misunderstand you. Let them build their stories about how you changed. Because what they're really saying is, I miss the version of you that made me more comfortable with myself. But comfort isn't connection, and performance isn't love. So stand still, in the quiet, in the ache, in the truth that no longer lets you go back. Because on the other side of this shedding is a different kind of relationship, not built on roles, but resonance, not on agreement, but authenticity. So ask yourself now, is your clarity worth the cost? And if it is, are you brave enough to keep walking anyway? There's a moment quiet, terrifying, when you realize you don't know who you are without the performance. Not the one you put on for strangers, not the one you crafted on social media, the one you wear for people who say they love you, the one you slowly stitch together from approval, expectation, and fear. That self, the one who always knows what to say, how to be, who to please doesn't die all at once. It unravels. You wake up one day and can't find the energy to text back in your usual tone. You cancel a plan, not because you're busy, but because you're tired of pretending you're excited. You speak in shorter sentences. You stop apologizing for your silence. You don't smile on command anymore. It's subtle at first, but deeply unsettling, because that self, the one who knew how to fit, is the one that kept you safe. It's the one that made you likable, relatable, predictable, but it also made you invisible to yourself. Now that you're no longer performing, people start to look at you differently. They ask if you're okay. They say, you've changed. They miss the old you, the one who over-explained, who made sure everyone was comfortable, who never said no without a smile. But what they really miss is the version of you that made them feel good. And the hardest part, you miss them too. You miss the warmth that came with being needed. You miss the illusion of closeness, even if it was built on compromise. You miss the certainty, even if it was suffocating. This is the grief no one warns you about. Not the loss of others, but the loss of you, or rather, the version of you who existed to be chosen. And yet, that death is necessary, because clarity doesn't just strip away illusions around you, it strips them from within you. You start to notice your patterns, how you deflected compliments, how you downplayed your pain, how you made jokes to hide your intelligence or strength. You see, in slow horror, just how much of your life was shaped by avoiding discomfort in others and in yourselves. But now, you stop. You let the silence stretch. You let the tension build. You let people sit in their own discomfort without rushing to soothe them with your false calm. You're not cruel. You're just done contorting. And in that space, raw, unfamiliar, silent, something begins to emerge. A different self, not polished, not pleasing, not immediate, but whole. One who doesn't chase approval, but stands rooted in quiet presence. One who speaks less, but means more. One who can be misunderstood and stay centered anyway. This self cannot be performed. It must be lived. And yes, some days, the grief will come back. You'll miss how easy it was to be liked. You'll feel the ache of being too much for some, not enough for others. You'll crave the applause that used to tell you you were real, but applause is just noise. And you've started listening for something else. Stillness, resonance, truth. So here's the question that now follows you everywhere. If no one claps, no one praises, no one even notices, would you still be this version of yourself? And if the answer is yes, then you're already free. You used to fill every silence, a text, a joke, a reassuring phrase. You thought stillness was awkward, maybe even dangerous, like a void that needed covering up. You didn't realize stillness is not emptiness. It's power. The world taught you to respond quickly, loudly, constantly. Say something, post something, explain yourself. We live in a culture of reaction where value is measured by visibility and opinions are currency. So when you stop, it unnerves people. They wonder if something's wrong. They poke, prod, try to pull you back into the rhythm they're used to. But you've gone still not as an escape, but as a stance. You've learned. True clarity doesn't shout, it listens. It waits. It watches for what doesn't need to be said. In a world trained to perform, stillness is a rebellion. It is a refusal to engage in the noise, a refusal to justify your boundaries, a refusal to abandon yourself for comfort's sake. Stillness is where the real answers live, the ones that can't be found in urgency. You don't heal by reacting faster. You heal by slowing down enough to feel what's actually there. And here's the paradox. The more you do this, the more people start to project onto you. Your silence becomes unsettling. They say you're distant, arrogant, cold. But what they really mean is your self-possession is a mirror they can't control. Stillness doesn't make you passive. It makes you discerning. You no longer respond to every insult. You no longer explain yourself when someone misreads your energy. You no longer chase conversations that drain your spirit, because now you know the difference between connection and transaction. This is where your clarity begins to solidify into sovereignty, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that roots. You start choosing presence over participation. You show up without performing. You listen without preparing a defense. You allow the silence to stretch, and in that stretch, the truth rises. People who thrive on chaos will find your calm confrontational. People who rely on your old patterns will call your peace distance. Let them, because stillness isn't for them. It's for you. It's the space where you hear your own thoughts clearly, without the interference of their expectations. It's the quiet that returns your intuition to you. It's the pause that reveals whether something is aligned or simply familiar. And slowly, your nervous system recalibrates. You no longer need the dopamine hit of being liked. You no longer fear the disconnection that used to terrify you. You realize peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop running from. This is the rebellion that doesn't need an audience. It doesn't shout in protest. It sits in truth. It doesn't argue for worth. It embodies it. It doesn't win debates. It walks away from battles that cost too much soul. So now, the question changes. Not how do I get them to understand me, but what am I no longer willing to abandon for the sake of being understood? And if you listen, really listen, you might hear something you haven't heard in a long time. Yourself, unfiltered, unrushed, unapologetic. And that version of you is not here to be reactive. They are here to be real. At first, it feels like exile. You walk away from rooms you used to light up. You unlearn the reflex to people please, to smooth over discomfort, to shrink yourself so others can expand. And in the silence that follows, it feels like you've lost everything. Because in a way you've lost the self who was built on borrowed beliefs. You've lost the circles that only loved your mask. You've lost the ease of belonging to something. Anything, even if it wasn't real. But sit in that silence a little longer. Stay when your mind tells you to run back. Wait through the ache of being unseen. And something strange begins to happen. You start to feel, well, here, not as a version of you, not as a role. Just you. No applause, no echo chamber, just a quiet presence that no longer needs to be verified. This is the belonging that no one teaches us to seek, because it's not built on similarity, it's not built on validation, it's built on truth. Not the collective kind, the personal kind, the kind that arises when you stop abandoning your inner world just to survive the outer one. You begin to notice moments that once felt unbearable now feel sacred. A morning with no messages feels like space, not punishment. A night alone doesn't feel empty. It feels like coming home. You start hearing your own thoughts before they're interrupted by expectation. You used to think belonging meant being accepted. Now you understand belonging is what happens when you no longer need to be chosen to feel whole. And from that inner ground, everything shifts. You speak with more care, not to be understood, but because your words finally belong to you. You listen more deeply, not to respond, but because you no longer fear silence. You connect, not to fill a void, but to share from a full well. And here's the quiet miracle. From that solitude, new people start to appear, not because you chased them, but because your truth became a frequency, and only those attuned to it could hear it. These aren't people who love the performance. They love your pauses. They love your boundaries. They love the way you don't need them but choose them. It's no longer about fitting in. It's about being met. And yes, the old loneliness may still visit. You may still long, sometimes, for the comfort of the crowd. But now you know. You'd rather be alone with your truth than surrounded by those who require your denial. So here's the shift that marks the end of one life and the beginning of another. You don't belong everywhere anymore. You don't belong to others. You belong with yourself. That is not loneliness. That is return. So ask yourself this. What if your isolation wasn't abandonment but initiation? And what if this whole time it wasn't about being found, but about finally choosing not to leave yourself behind? You will lose the comfort of being understood, but you will find the rare power of being whole, because when you stop shaping yourself to fit into someone else's illusion, you begin to return to something ancient and real, your essence. When you stop performing, you start living. When you stop reacting, you begin listening. And when you stop seeking approval, you discover something sacred. Your peace no longer depends on being seen. It comes from finally seeing yourself. This is not the end of something. It's the rebirth of everything. No longer the chameleon, no longer the echo. This is the first time you are living without asking permission. So now I ask you, are you willing to lose who you were in order to become who you really are? Can you bear the silence long enough for your true voice to return? If the answer is yes, write it, feel it, anchor it in your being. I choose to be clear, even if it costs me comfort. I choose to be whole, even if it means being misunderstood. I choose peace over performance. And if you've made that choice, even silently tell me, where are you now in this journey? Have you already let go of a mask? Have you begun to hear your own voice again? Write it below. Name it. Not for me, for you. Because once you write it, something shifts. You become witness to your own becoming. And in the next part of this journey, we'll go even deeper into how to hold your center when the world tries to pull you back into the person you used to be. Because it will. But so will you if you know how to stay rooted. I'll see you in the next video where we'll walk together into the next layer of clarity.